All right. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the HiFi Summit. We are kicking off our seminar with SVS. I know everybody loves their bass. So, welcome, Nick and Larry from SVS. How are you guys doing today?
Woo woo. Doing
Wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thanks for being here.
I would hit the cheer button, but I don't know if it's going to do a cheer or a different noise here.
Save the cheer. All applause at the end, please.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So yeah, it's good to have you guys. We mention SVS all the time, right? In our videos, people always ask like, what should I get? And it's almost always I'm always saying like just get SVS just because we know what it
3000.
You can go 1000, 2000, 3000, you know what I mean? 2000 Pro, don't get it twisted. You know, you can go up the line, right? Spend a little bit, you can spend a lot. And so you guys have a lot of different products and it's easy to recommend because they all do their thing. They get down to 20 hertz, which is what I always recommend, you know? So it's not that I'm biased towards SVS. It's just that I like these guys more than everybody else.
That doesn't sound like bias.
Is that okay?
Now, do you say that on every one of these broadcasts?
Yeah, that's right.
I guess you'll have to watch the replay to find out.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, if I could say something, I mean, I know how much work you guys put into this, and given the scenario in the world right now, and people being at home, not being able to go to events like Expona and CES maybe even, and some of these regional shows, like what you guys are doing is really important. So it was important for us to kind of show that we want to be part of this. We want to help grow this industry. We have passion for this stuff. Like Larry and I live this stuff. You can see it in his room more than mine right now. We just live and breathe this stuff. So if there's anything we can do to help raise the profile of the audio industry and just get people excited about great sound, that's what we're going to do. We're here to talk about subwoofers. I think people really know us for our subwoofers, but we are a full-on audio brand with accessories and speakers. So I have to throw that little plug in there. But really, we just wanted to kind of offer some tips and tricks to get your sub sounding its best and guide people to get the best possible sound out of their system. So that's what today will be all about. And hopefully, we'll have some fun, answer some questions, and make this thing a huge success for years to come.
Yeah, I'm gonna pop myself out. I'll let you guys have the floor. I'll be hanging out, so if you need me, I'm here. I'm listening, but I want to give you guys a spotlight here.
Cool. Appreciate that, Joe.
Floor is yours, gentlemen. Enjoy.
Cool. All right. So Larry is our national training manager at SVS, and Larry, maybe you can just tell people really quickly what that involves, and maybe how many subwoofers you set up in your life, or maybe just in the past couple of years here. Give a little background.
So my role being the training manager, I'm responsible for interacting with all the stores and educating them on our products, setting up demonstrations at our events, making sure everybody understands how to utilize our multi-room wireless products, our Subwoofer app, understands the differences between all the products, and then assist the sales team with interacting with all of you on the user side of things.
And when it comes to Subwoofer Setup, like, on some level, it seems like it should be fairly easy. It's kind of a plug and play process when you boil down to it, like the very essence of you connect a cable, it's hooked up to this, back your AV receiver, preamp or whatever, and you get bass. But all along the way, there's a lot of different factors that sort of play into the overall performance of that subwoofer within your system. And that differs whether it's a home theater system or a 2-channel system. So some of those little intricacies I think will be interesting for us to discuss today and sort of roll it out there. So, from your perspective, whether you're going into a store or doing it in your own home, you got the subwoofer, you get it out of the box, placement's the first sort of step. What would you tell people about placement in terms of, that first step in getting the subwoofer set up?
Well, there's a lot of different ways you can place a sub, and in some cases, there's really only one place it can go. You may only be able to put it up in the front corner of your room or off to the side, and so sometimes that's really all it can do. But if you can find the optimal spot, the easiest way to do it is utilize a kind of a geeky thing called the Subwoofer Crawl. And once you do that, and we'll get into that here in a second, you can find the absolute best and most possible output from your subwoofer in a localized space. And the way to do it, you got to just get a little dirty real quick and plug up the subwoofer and find something to play, whether it's just a bass note, like a 40 hertz bass note from a app or YouTube or whatever, or playing a musical track that and physically putting the subwoofer in a couple different places in your room, play that note, play that track, play whatever you're listening to, and then go to your listening position and see which location in the room where you place the subwoofer gives you the most impact in your space. And the reason it's called the Subwoofer Crawl is technically what you do is you put the subwoofer in your seat, and then you walk around or crawl around the room until you feel the biggest impact in your room. So say you put the subwoofer in your couch right where you sit, and you walk around, and your front right corner of the room is really heavy. You feel the bass through your head, through your ears and everything, but you start moving slightly further over and you lose a little bit of it. And you continue moving and you don't ever get as much strength as you had that first spot, then you know that's where the subwoofer needs to go so that you feel that impact and that power where you're sitting. And that's kind of troublesome, but you can do it, and it's fantastic.
And that's when you have, versatility to place the subwoofer anywhere. As you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of times there's one or two spots. You pick the best one aesthetically, depending on if there's lifestyle considerations, we call them, to sort of judge where it's going to go. And an important comment, Derek Rollins mentioned, what you're trying to do with that Subwoofer Crawl is find out where you get the flattest response, not necessarily the boomiest, deepest, loudest bass, because that actually means that the placement isn't very good if you're getting sort of a boomy one note effect. So looking for that flat frequency response is really what you're going after. So ideally you have the subwoofer placed, you have it hooked up to an AV receiver. We're going to start with home theater. As we mentioned, there's sort of a different process for home theater to 2-channel. But with home theater, you have it set up. Before we dive into that, I do want to mention there were some questions about RU and UMIC microphones. That gets very technical, so we're probably not going to dive too much into that, but our sound experts, our team support staff can definitely help you with some of those qualifications and how to actually run that software. But for the purposes of this one, we're probably not going to go too deep into that. So back to the matter at hand here. You have your subwoofer placed, you have it in the room. What is your next step as setting up the system?
Well, if kind of placement is the big part of it. So, if you can put it up front, that's great because it'll blend with your front stage, off to the sides, wherever you end up finding the best spot for it. After that's tuning. And tuning can be done a lot of different ways. Like you just mentioned, the microphones and UMic and mini DSP. And I personally don't do any of that because I'm constantly changing stuff out. But if you have a Denon or Marantz receiver, you have Odyssey. If you have Onkyo or Pioneer, you have MCACC, you have YPAO with Yamaha and all these other ones. You get into ARC. And what you do is you kind of let the receiver do a lot of it. But there are some things you need to do beforehand to make sure that you're not going to get too much or not enough out of your subwoofer. So for instance, I tend to use a lot of Denon and Marantz products. So whenever you get them set up, the first thing it does with your subwoofer, it actually looks for a volume leveling. And when you do the volume leveling, it'll tell you get to this particular point. And so that whenever it does the room correction by sending out the tones to all the different channels, it doesn't overpower the subwoofer and doesn't say, oh, I need to pull back the levels to the sub. So we normally recommend that everybody that's doing a home theater setup, utilizing the integrated room correction, that you pull the volume on our subs down to level match or somewhere around half volume on the subwoofers where we tend to go. And then after you've run your room correction and done all your settings and everything, then you can bump it back up if you feel the need.
So really part of tuning a subwoofer is finding that balance with the speakers. The end goal here is really to create a system that it sounds like the bass from the subwoofers is coming from all the individual speakers, not this one box in the corner or in the side of the room. You're really trying to achieve that balance. So in doing some of the things that you just mentioned, you're sort of setting up yourself to get an accurate room correction from some of the services that you mentioned. So now that you have the subwoofer set up, you run the room correction. A lot of times those results aren't the final story. It's not like, okay, ran a room correction, you're good to go. There's a lot that I won't say could go wrong, but there's little adjustments that can be made to optimize it. You dive into to that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the things that comes up a lot, I think probably the number one call to our sound experts customer service team is whenever somebody runs that system and then they go sit down and listen to it, they're not getting the output from the sub that they expect. And in most cases, it's because a lot of receivers recognize a tower speaker and set it as large. And what it does is it's sharing the bass information in between your front stage and your subwoofer. So you're not getting as much output from the LFE signal. So we tend to recommend people set their speakers to small and then adjust their crossover accordingly. So like behind me, I have a pair of prime towers. I've got them set to small with a crossover down at 60 hertz. Then adjust it from there. What that does, and then you can get in and adjust your low frequency output. And I have my LFE set in this particular room at 100 hertz, but downstairs my subwoofer is set to 120. So it also can kind of vary per room.
So you did mention setting the speakers to small, and this is a very misunderstood topic. And I know it's not, necessarily specific to Subwoofer Setup, but can you walk people through the difference between when your speakers are set to large versus small?
So when your system is set to large, the best way to look at it, especially if you're using a conventional AVR. So if you're just using, most of us out there go and buy a conventional AVR. We're not doing separates and stuff like that. But if you are doing separates, you have a little bit more control. But if you're just using a simple surround sound receiver in your setup, if you have your speakers, say you've got towers, and they're capable of going down into the 30, 40 hertz range, yes, they can do that. But if you're driving your receiver to do all the information to your front towers, highs, mids, and lows, and extreme low frequencies, and to your sub, you're putting a little bit more wear and tear on your receiver, but you're also taking away some of the signal to the low frequency output. So we typically recommend set them to small and then adjust the crossover accordingly. And then what would happen is more of the information for the bass will be shared with the subwoofer. And it also takes a little bit of wear and tear off the amps on your receiver too.
When you say set the crossover appropriately, or I don't know the exact term you said, is what exactly does that mean based on your speakers, frequency response?
So depending on where your speakers are capable of going to low frequency, we tend to recommend find that point and go 10 to 20 hertz higher than that on your receiver. That way, you're not putting as much, stress on your speakers, would be a way to put it. But you let the subwoofer do the heavy lifting and then enjoy all the clarity and detail that the speakers are capable of offering. So even though the speakers are capable of going to one point, I don't go as low, and you can blend them and play with crossover as you see fit. But we tend to recommend go small unless you're using some drivers that have big, huge 8 or 10-inch woofers in them. Then we might recommend going large, but you're also probably going to be using a more powerful receiver or amplifier in that case as well.
So how are you typically judging the performance? Like after you've got what you think it is a properly set up subwoofer, how are you just pulling anything off the shelf? Do you have test tracks? Like how do you actually process whether or not you did it right?
Well, we have a couple tracks that we use at SVS to test them. Some of the music tracks that we do, we get a little crazy for me personally, but we tend to listen to some more on the movie side of things. We start with something like Guardians of the Galaxy. That's chapter 7. You guys all know it's the prison break scene. It's got a really nice bass sweep that we listen for, and we know what those notes should sound like in a room. If we're not getting it where we think it should be, then we'll go back and make some additional adjustments. Ready Player One's another one that we listen to. So on the subwoofer side, I know what notes should sound like based on how many of these things that we've set up. I mean, I didn't completely answer your question in the beginning, how many we've set up, but throughout a year, I might set up over 150 to 200 systems around the country. And I've gotten to where I know, oh, that's not right. And we'll make an adjustment based on what I've listened to. And it drives my family nuts because I'm constantly adjusting it downstairs too.
So I saw a couple comments here, and I think you kind of addressed this, but maybe you can expand upon it a little bit. Do you run those DSP corrections before or after you run Odyssey or some of those other calibration services? So
what I will do is I will run Odyssey first. And after I run Odyssey, I go in and I will check whatever the receiver recognized the speakers as, and I will adjust them from there because it almost always recognizes towers as large. And I'll tend to adjust those accordingly. Normally around the 40, 60, 80 hertz range is where I'll set a tower. Center channel, kind of about the same. But the subwoofer I will play with in regards to level and crossover. I tend to put subwoofers for home theater in the 100 to 120 hertz range for a 5.1 or 7 channel or 9 channel surround system. And it is different. I know we're going to get into music, but I set things up a little differently in music. But if you're looking at our Subwoofer Control App, after I've run the Odyssey room correction or YPAO or whatever, I really just get in and adjust volume, and maybe the occasionally I'll get in and adjust some of the room gain compensation stuff, but typically on home theater I don't mess with it much in stores.
You mentioned room gain compensation. That primarily has to do with sealed cabinet subwoofers, and for those who don't know, I mean, it's basically using your room to get deeper low frequency extension and greater dynamic output out of the subwoofer just based on sort of the wave patterns in the room. What can you tell people about sort of harnessing room gain, I guess you could say, because it can also be a bad thing.
Yeah.
But in general, it gives you more value out of a sealed subwoofer in a lot of instances.
Yeah, and some people like what room gain does. Like for instance, if I'm doing a training with a retailer, we'll go in a room with an SB16 Ultra, and I'll put on something like Beyonce Partition, and we'll play that, and we'll let them listen to what happens with the room gain by where we kind of place the subwoofer in a room. And if you have a closed off square room, like I'm in here in this extra bedroom, you do get some room gain based on placement, and it can add a little more headroom. It can add more output, but can also cause kind of a one note bass in some rooms as well. So by having room gain compensation in our app, you're able to take care of like nulls you may have or excesses in say a 25 hertz or a 30 hertz or a 40 hertz range. And it gets kind of geeky, and I rarely ever use it, but it is totally there. It can also be used if you're getting kind of bottom heavy on a ported subwoofer as well. If you're seeing that the output's just a little too much for a space, you can kick on the room gain and adjust it and normally throw on a 25 or 31 hertz compensation there too.
But in general, room gain, it should be turned off in ported subwoofers. It's going to just give you a little bit too much of that breathiness, that sort of boomy effect that can be distracting and not as accurate as sort of that crisp performance you get from a sealed subwoofer. So I know you have spoken in the past about issues you have with content where like some movie producers, some camps will make great soundtracks and it'll sound amazing and it's like the bass is so in your face, and then other ones it's like, why are they leaving off the low frequencies? I think you called it Disney, right? It was one of the ones that you think had sort of lackluster.
You did, and I think everybody in the community knows this too. I think if you're looking at studios that do things really well, Warner, Universal, all those releases sound fantastic. Most of the Sony releases do too. But if you're sitting down to watch a big old cinematic universe movie and the output's a little light, I think it's disappointing for a lot of us. But I think we've all kind of learned you just increase the volume a little bit, and that extra 3 to 5 dB takes care of that.
Well, that's actually why I brought it up, because
look
I
at
think
that.
a common thank you for that segue. You picked up on what I was dropping there. But yeah, really, I think the question is, do you do those adjustments on the subwoofer, or do you raise the gain within the AV receiver, or are there instances where you might do one or the other?
So I rarely ever, after I get the adjustments where I want, I rarely ever make any adjustments extra in the receiver. And the reason I don't do a whole lot much in the receiver anymore is because of the Subwoofer Control App that we have. And if you haven't had a chance to play with our Subwoofer Control App, it's got a lot of really fine-tuned adjustments you can make. So downstairs in our living room, for instance, where I have our 2000 Pro series, I've made adjustments based on what we watch the most. So I've set a preset for movies, and our movie watching preset, there's more output, more volume than there really needs to be. But when we're watching TV shows or sports, or kids are watching Cartoon Network, we have a TV preset that pulls it down quite a bit, because when you're watching those, the bass can be just unnerving in some of those instances. So I essentially just pull down the volume a bit. And then we have a nighttime setting, which is, lovingly referred to in our trainings as wife mode, where it shuts it completely off so that I can go down there and watch something with the kids or whatever and not wake anybody else up throughout the house. But normally all I'm doing in that case is typically adjusting the gain volume. That's really about it.
Sure. So we did mention it's a little bit different when you're talking about a 2-channel audiophile system. You're typically not running the room correction. You're not putting the mic in several seats around the room. It's just a different fundamental process. So we have the subwoofer placed, so that part is done. You have your 2-channel speakers. What's your next step when setting up in a 2-channel system?
So, and this is where they really differ, because if you're doing a home theater system, you're going to typically not mess with crossovers on your subwoofer at all. You're going to let the receiver do all of that. But when you move into a 2-channel system, you're needing to allow more frequency control, allow the ability to blend with speakers a little bit differently. So that's where you'll start messing with crossover on your subwoofer. If you're coming off of, say, a 2-channel amp, or like I've got our Soundbase wireless system up here where I've got a subwoofer connected to. And what you would do is you would find the crossover where your subwoofer and your speakers tend to blend the best. And we have a tool on our site. I don't know how big of an infomercial we want to do, but we have a tool on our site where it's a matching tool. And what you do is you put in a brand of speakers and a model of speakers, and it gives you a point where your crossover should be set in the subwoofer to blend with those speakers. And I use that typically as a starting point. I might adjust it a little bit from there. But most of the 2-channel systems we do with, say, like our Prime Pinnacle speakers, we might put the subwoofer as thanks as maybe a 50 or 60 hertz crossover, and then adjust the slope if necessary. So there's a lot of things you can do, and there's more you can do to along with the room gain compensation, where you're probably not gonna mess with it a lot. Parametric EQ, if you want to get in there and do some boosts on some particular frequencies. If you want to get in and mess with phase, and that's a whole other ball game. But if you are really trying to get that perfect blend with your front stage, and maybe your subwoofer isn't necessarily right there with your front stage speaker in a 2-channel setup, maybe it's off to the side, each of our subwoofers with the Control App has a variable gain adjustment, or sorry, a variable phase adjustment. So you can get in there and actually adjust from 0 all the way to 180 and make some really...
I'm glad you brought up phase, because I think that's another thing where people see this control and, they might just tweak with it just to see what it does without really knowing what it does. Walk people through a little bit of what phase is, and then when you're adjusting it, how can that actually get your system dialed in?
So typically on the back of most subwoofers, you'll see a switch, 0 or 180. And what that does, it has it work in conjunction with your speakers or with another subwoofer in the room. And you'll normally, typically the nomenclature was you put one subwoofer at 0 and one at 180 and just hope that it kind of worked and they didn't cancel each other out. But when you have phase and you can get in there and adjust it, maybe your front channel is kind of directly here in front of you, but your subwoofer, the only place it can go is over off to the right. And you want to kind of get it blended in there. So what it does is it does some phase adjustments to move it to where it's working in conjunction with your front stage, as opposed to slightly being offset or slightly out of time correction. So that's really what it's for, is allows you to really get that blend. And if you have multiple subs, one might need to be at 15 degrees, one might need to be at 0, one might need to be at 80, one might need to be at 110. And that's really what the variable adjustment gives you, is so that you can get that perfect blend. So if you want that sweet spot or sweet area, you can really correct that.
And I think one thing that's important to mention is if you have too much overlap between your subwoofers and speakers, it can actually give you like a boomy sort of sound. And we had a question here from EM, and I saw the other question that popped up from the Brown Note, which is a great logo, by the way. I might have to make some t-shirts out of that, my namesake and all. But adjusting the slope, that's essentially sort of has to do with the crossover point and how aggressively it crosses over. What exactly are you adjusting when you're moving the slope?
So when you're doing slope, what that is essentially where the bass rolls off from the speaker. And most subwoofers don't have a slope adjustment, so the roll off might be a little more harsh or less controlled. So we have a 12 and 18 and 24, is it 6, 18? I don't know. We have 3 slope adjustments in our Subwoofer Control App so that you can actually get that perfectly timed roll off to blend with your speakers properly. And I adjust that specifically when I'm doing 2-channel, because that's when I turn on the LFE. And if you get into the app, you can turn on the low frequency filter and adjust the crossover where you need. And then so like we're partnered with Bowers speakers a lot, and we tend to throw I want to say an 18 dB roll off whenever we do that with the slope, and might put a crossover on their large towers at 50 hertz with an 18 dB slope. And that's so that there is that blend, so that when the musical notes hit and everything comes together and blends together properly.
So going back to the legendary Brown Notes question of the old adage, sealed versus ported, this isn't exactly in the realm of setup and calibration, but it is one of the most debated topics among subwoofers. And I will share some perspective on our philosophy as a subwoofer manufacturer. We really try to narrow the delta between that sort of effortless, massive impact that you can get from a big ported subwoofer and this sort of more punchy, crisp speed and transients, that pinpoint accuracy you get from a sealed cabinet subwoofer. I think personally, both types of subwoofers are capable of doing all of those things really, really well. You don't have to sacrifice that massive output and like subterranean extension in order to get the accuracy. One just does it better than the other. So it's a matter of what are your listening preferences, what are your tastes, how much space do you have in your listening room? Yeah. And those are really the bigger factors in my mind. But I don't know, what insights can you share about just sort of the ported or sealed debate?
Well, I have both in the house. This room, just because of its size, is a sealed subwoofer, but downstairs my living room is open to kitchen and dining and hall and all that stuff. So I do have a cylinder sub down there. And part of the reason, like you just mentioned, size, I'd always had sealed down there, and then the PC 2000 Pro came about, and our TV, awful room for a theater, I'll just throw that out there. But my TV sits in a corner, and my cylindrical sub sits behind it. And I do that, number one, it's out of the way, but it really pressurizes the entire downstairs space. But I tend to like the ability of a ported subwoofer because you do get more volume at lower frequencies. You do get a little bit more frequency, deeper frequencies out of it too. But one real thing to kind of think about with our ported subs, everything from the 2000 Pro and above can be both. And what I mean by that is once again, getting into the app, you can actually adjust the way the subwoofer operates from a sealed mode or a ported mode on our PC 2000 Pro, PB 2000 Pro, PB 3000, PB 4000, PB 16, where you can get these foam plugs from us, and we'll send them to you for free if you've got them. Then you get into the app and you do a port tuning mode where you can take the sub from fully open ported and change it into sealed operation. So if you want to have both, and if you're doing that, if you want that big over-the-top theatrical IMAX level bass experience, maybe you want one of our ported subs. But if you are listening to that super fast repetitions, quick bass and some music, you might want the accuracy, speed, and transient response of a sealed subwoofer. And so by doing one of our ported subs with the Subwoofer Control app, you can have both. And
I think it's an important distinction there. When you're plugging the ports, there's the way we do it. It's a unique port tuning frequency. It's not like you can just stuff a sock in the port and you're going to get, that sealed performance. It actually changes the tuning frequency of the subwoofer when you adjust it within the app and then have those plugs in place. So that basically keeps you from getting inaccurate bass and some of the sort of distracting elements that you would get from just stuffing something in and then changing the tuning frequency, changing the output without adjusting the tuning frequency. Those are big things you don't want to mess with. And just going back, we had a question about the Subwoofer Crawl. Do you face the sub towards the AV unit or towards the back of the room? Because literally where you want to put it is put the subwoofer on your recliner, your couch, whatever, in that main seating position. What do? Do you face it forward, backwards? Does it even matter?
I face it back towards my front stage. I don't think I've ever tried facing it the other direction, but I face it back towards the front stage. And if you do have one of the big old huge subs, a 4000 or 16 Ultra, it may not fit in your seat. So put it directly on there, or if you can push back your sitting position just to get the subwoofer in its space, you do that. But if you put it in there and face it back towards your listening position, that's what I do.
Yeah. And I saw a sort of question about don't know the difference between ported and open. Ported, it's also known as vented subwoofers. It just means they have ports that allow it to release more air. And in general, that allows the subwoofer to create more dynamic output at lower frequencies and really dig down deeper than a sealed cabinet. Whereas the sealed cabinet really allows that driver to hit much crisper speed and transients, move, stop and start on a dime, as well as create a better sense of musicality, I guess, if we're making up words here. So that's sort of the difference. And I see a question from Greg G. Can you mix brands of subwoofers? Not ideal. I think the more important thing you don't want to do is mix ported and sealed. Because as you were talking about phase issues, you can have some misalignment of the bass, and that can certainly happen if you mix brands of subwoofers. But my advice would be stick to subwoofers with a similar driver size, but absolutely don't mix the ported with the sealed cabinets. Otherwise, you're going to potentially get some distractions. Anything you want to throw on top of there?
No, if you throw a ported subwoofer in a room with a sealed subwoofer, I know there's people that like to do both, but once you do that, you're going to be really more impacted by the ported sub, and it tends to overpower the sealed sub. But if you can do two, but go both ported, both sealed, and like Nick said, try to get them as close to similar as you can. I'm big proponents of going two. It's a big part of the training app influence that we have in regards to, and I see Ahmad throw up here, 2 small subwoofers versus 1 big. It's really up to what's going to fit in your room, but we do tend to recommend 2 subwoofers because you'll get better bass balance throughout the space. You don't get as much of a sweet spot. You have an area for more people to enjoy. And typically smaller subs are easier to place than larger subs as well, which I think we've all run into. And you get a better frequency response from 2. You get a little bit more headroom. There's a lot of benefits to going dual.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another question here too about raising the subwoofers off the floor and what effect, if any, does that have on performance? And I think it's less about elevating them. It's more about decoupling them. We have a product, these SoundPath subwoofer isolation feet that basically elevate the subwoofer, decouple it from the floor. So instead of sort of putting that energy into your floor, hey, look at you, right on cue. Instead of like having the subwoofer sit on the floor and some of that energy going into the floor and walls, it's now sort of connoitering, so it's shooting it out into the air a little bit more. And there's risers, there's other solutions for decoupling a subwoofer. I'm not saying that's the only one you can go with, but typically if you raise it up into the air, but it's on like a rickety shelf, that's not going to do much for you. It's the decoupling aspect of it. So, you know, I mean, what's been your experience using you know, our solution and others with decoupling?
So anybody that's watched our broadcast knows the infamous albums falling off the wall back here behind me from I have an SB 2000 in here, and it did not have the isolation system on there, so I was knocking stuff off. But you know what you can get by adding, you know, a couple inches or doing an isolation system or a pad or something like that on your subwoofer, really what it does, it can tighten up the bass in your room a little bit, but really the purpose of it is to stop interrupting everything else around you, so that you don't knock stuff off the wall. So if you're in a condo or an apartment, your neighbor isn't getting as much impact when you're watching a big over-the-top theatrical experience. If you are watching something in a room where maybe you're upstairs and there's people downstairs, you won't disrupt them as much. But really, it can tighten up the sound in a room. It can lessen the impact of things hanging on your wall or the essentially stuff, you know, rattling in your fridge on the other side of the house too.
Well, in your case, personal circumstance, you don't want to knock your wife's makeup into the toilet either. You know, that's never a good, and that's never a fun conversation to have after that happens. I know you hate when I mention that.
Other story, but yes, I learned my lesson very heartily with these things. When I had the SV16 Ultra and watching the movie Deepwater Horizon, there was a good hour of me being excessively loud, and it shook some stuff directly above it into, as you just said, into a toilet.
To answer Chad's question, you don't, a concrete floor, it'll be much less noticeable. It can still have a positive impact, you know, especially if you have, you know, rattling things, knickknacks, whatever on the walls. It can help with that. But in general, you know, your wood flooring, you know, if you're in a row house or an apartment, like those are going to be the best opportunities, or decoupling will help you the most. But certainly a concrete floor, you know, again, it's more about the room itself than the floor in that instance and what you have. For this owner, I mean, if you have 4 PB2000 Pros, like it doesn't matter where you put them, you're going to have even bass response pretty much throughout, unless you maybe just stack them in a single column. But I would say, you know, in general, if you have the ability to run subwoofers in all 4 corners, I mean, it doesn't really matter how you face it. Its bass is omnidirectional. So at that point, it's like you're so saturated with sound waves, like, you know, what more can you really do?
Yeah. And if you could do 2 kind of up front and 2 in the back, and if with the ported sub placement isn't as big a deal as sealed, but if you can get them just kind of opposite each other, you're going to have a phenomenal experience all the way around.
So this one always comes up, and it's a tough one to answer because I don't think room size is always the greatest way to judge what subwoofer that you should that's right for you. I mean, I think there's a lot of other factors that come before room size. Certainly you wouldn't want to put, you know, a 10-inch subwoofer in a 5,000 square foot, you know, ballroom. That's not going to get you what you need. But what's sort of your philosophy on matching subwoofers to room size?
Well, a lot of it's going to come down to, you know, what you're trying to accomplish in the space, and also what you can fit a lot of the time. But what we tend to recommend a subwoofer is typically going to be based on your front stage. And then if we need to elevate that a little bit based on your room size, we might go one model up or recommend duals. And, you know, downstairs, I've got this big open space and I'm just using one single ported subwoofer because it's capable of taking on that entire room. And a lot of it has to do with where I have it placed, because I do have it corner loaded. So it is adding a little more emphasis to the room. But if you're in a large open concept space and there's not, you know, somewhere that you can take advantage of some of the room gain that we talked about earlier, going a little bit larger or going from sealed to ported can make the biggest difference. And that tends to be one of the biggest things that come up with people saying they're putting a subwoofer in a room and they end up going sealed. and it's just not enough output. So you need to either go to a second sealed sub or go, like we mentioned earlier, somebody's talking about going to one larger ported sub if it can fit in a larger open space, because a ported sub will take on a larger room better too.
Yeah. So to answer this question, certainly it will help. It does add a little bit of height to the subwoofer in general. They're bigger than the stock feet, so you do want to take that into account when doing your measurements. But if you're putting it in furniture, there's a potential tendency for it to rattle, especially if it has like glass panels. So certainly that would be an instance where you'd want to explore decoupling.
Yeah, I helped out. There was a sales guy I was working with just before all this went down, where a client of his was trying to put 1000s or 2000s into a big armoire that he was building. And it came down to, he wanted them so bad, he just cut the bottom part out of a cabinet, put the 2000 Pro in there with the isolation system, putting it on the floor, but it was still in the cabinet. And before he did the isolation system, the doors were rattling, but after he put them on there, it was taken care of. So exactly what you were just saying.
It makes you a better neighbor, cleans up some of those distracting noise artifacts that a subwoofer can cause, which actually some people like. I've never really understood the whole, like, my whole house is rattling, that's awesome. Like, I kind of want to like see the movie, but to each his own. You want to hear your pictures rattling, that's all for you.
Well, before we went to CES, where we saw these guys, I put the PC 2000 Pro downstairs, and you guys know I love to demo Ninja Turtles. And, having kids, they enjoyed it. And I was upstairs getting ready, and my kids were watching the movie downstairs because after I demoed it for them, they wanted to hear it. And for the first time in my life, I actually heard pipes rattling in the house, and I was laughing hysterically. And so I think we all kind of have that. We're like, sweet, I actually made that happen. So I think there's a little bit of that out there in all of us too.
Yep. I did want, you've only mentioned the app about 100 times during the broadcast today. So I do think we should maybe show a little bit of it. We have about 5-10 minutes left here. There was one question, if we can mix the ported box with the cylinder. Yes, those are both ported subwoofers. The output's almost exactly the same when you get from like the PC 2000 Pro to the PB 2000 Pro. So there's no problem blending those two types of subwoofers if that's something that you want to explore for your listening space. So we have, like I said, about 5-10 minutes left. We have our app. This is a useful tool that basically allows you to do a lot of the the subwoofer tuning after you get through Odyssey, but then also control aspects. So you're watching something, listening to something, you're in your seat, you don't want to get up, go to the back of the sub, turn the knob, listen to see if you made an improvement. Maybe just do a quick walk through of what exactly people can get from the app and how it can be used to dial in their subs.
So if you look at our app, it's just a Bluetooth control app. So you're not adding anything to your Wi-Fi or anything along those lines. You simply download the app. It's an Android and iOS. And when you open it up, this is a training presentation I put together to show people how to do it. But what you have is the ability to just connect to a subwoofer. And you'll see over here we have these menus where you can get in and access all of that stuff we were talking about. And you can get in, you can make all the adjustments you'd want to in the world for your your favorite listening setups for music, your favorite setups for movies, watching television. Get in here, adjust your low pass, your phase, your parametric EQ. And if you don't know what something is or how to really deep dive on it, there's actually tutorials to walk you through when you're going to use the LFE, when you're going to use the parametric EQ.
When are you going to use the parametric EQ, Larry?
Typically on a music setup, or really when you're struggling, and I'll show you what I created here. So right here. So when you're having nulls, if you're...
what is a null? Well, a null is basically a dead zone within your listening room where the bass sort of just sucks out and you're like, where'd it go?
Yeah, what's funny, in most listening rooms and stores, because the way they're set up, almost always the bass null is right in the middle where you're standing, because you typically have a system on 4 walls. And so we play with that quite a bit in retail stores. But the thing that I tend to use the most in here is actually, sorry, let me bring this up here, is presets. And the presets is because of how much different listening all of us do. And if you have, like earlier, you have a setting you really love for watching movies, but then you're trying to switch over to music, you can save a custom preset for each of those. So maybe you do have a receiver that's capable of doing full range 2-channel and home theater at the same time. You can save a movie preset where the LFE is off and the adjustments are done by the receiver.
Thank you, Jason. Sorry, I'm just saying, showing some love.
Sorry. Then you can actually save a preset for music where all those adjustments for low pass and phase and parametric EQ and all that stuff's been done. And you can save all those adjustments internally. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can get in here and do with the app. And if you just you can play with it. You don't even have to be connected to a sub. If you just want to get in there and play with the app and see everything you can do, it's totally active without having to have a product. But say you've got 4 SVS subwoofers in your house, like that gentleman did earlier, you can name them whatever you want, take control of them independently, because maybe you want a little bit more from the subs that are behind you as opposed to the ones in front. You can make all those adjustments on the fly. So all of this is in here where you can get in there and adjust it and walk you through all of that stuff as well.
Yeah, I will say there are some people saying, can they get this presentation? And I see Youthman dropping some comments here. He is created one of the best videos that I've seen on the app. So if you get a chance, go to his channel. He'll walk you through every single one of these details. And then obviously our support team is available as well if you have specific questions about your own system. And for the gentleman who asked about, having our PB2000s, which don't have the app, we do have a really detailed blog on our site about subwoofer calibration that can walk you through basically the adjustments you should make even if you don't have the app. So all of that can be explained there. But I would definitely encourage anyone who's sort of a novice with the app to check out Youthman's video, because he needs the views. No, he doesn't actually, but it's a great resource that will really help you out and get you understanding how to tune the bass here. I feel like
to say something here, Nick, based on what's on screen, I think they're trying to get something out of us.
Well, the big secret at SVS is that we don't tell secrets, so we will not share what plans we have anytime. But this is the sort of stock teaser that I've been giving people, only because our president Gary has sort of spilled the beans a little bit already. This year, CEDIA, which is a trade show for integrators of home technology, has been canceled, obviously. And it's big with architectural speakers and architectural audio, built-in type stuff. So we were going to make a big splash there this year, and now we can't. But around that time of the year, there still might be a big splash in that realm. It's not the only thing we're working on, but it's the only thing I'm going to tell you about today. So keep your 18-inch driver conversations internal for now. And, that's all that I'm at liberty to say at this point. So, keep tuning in, and we'll let you know. So I do realize we have to wrap up here. These guys at the HiFi Summit have a huge array of different sort of seminars going on today, and we want to be respectful for the next crew that's coming in. I do have to show a little bit of love for SVS and share some plugs. All the information about our subwoofers, our speakers, our wireless audio, as well as our sound path accessories is at our site, svsound.com. We have a bunch of blogs there that will help you with in-depth setup questions and everything that you'd ever want to know about audio system setup. We've got videos, featured systems from some of our owners. So go check all that stuff out. Larry, me, you, and Gary, we also have our own little live stream things that we do. We call them the Virtual Audiophile Happy Hour. The next one is coming up Thursday, July 9th. It'll be at 6 p.m. on both the SVS Facebook and the YouTube channel. Larry, what T-shirt are you going to be wearing that night? Or anything you want to share in terms of a teaser or what people can expect?
I don't know what I'll be doing, but you guys, I just wear goofy shirts, so it's my Revenge of the Nerd shirt today. I think that's one of the perks of all this is we haven't really had to get dressed up much for the last 3.5 months.
Love it.
Yeah, but I think we're going to be talking, new content, things we've been watching, movies, and maybe even get into some demo stuff as well. So we've got a lot planned for you guys.
Yep. And last thing I would like to say is just thanks to Joe and Tel, Techno Dad, you guys, for putting this together. There's been a lot of sleepless nights, yet you look so energized right now. I don't know how you're doing. You must have a good makeup team behind the scenes there. But thank you for doing this and letting us be a part of it. We couldn't be happier to support the cause you guys are pushing, and
awesome.
Hopefully many of these to come.
And by the way, I just popped in, not to remind you, I just popped in because you guys were talking about a new sub. So you guys can go all day.
Yeah,
I got no name. I got nothing other than a teaser for a trade show we're not going to, and what that trade show is about. So I like my job. I want to keep
architectural subwoofer, 22 inches. What is that? Was that what I heard?
Yeah, don't be putting that out there. That'll end up on
words in my mouth.
Yeah, no, but
get me in trouble.
Gary, our CEO, definitely made an announcement. About 6 weeks ago or something on one of our events. So you can see it.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it's a shame.
We're working on a lot of different things, though. That's not it. That's just the one that I'm at liberty to tell you about. But we always got some different, pokers in the fire that'll be coming out before the year's through.
Yeah, and
Great.
also one last thing is for those who are part of the one of the attendees. If you're an attendee, you can go to the giveaways page, and SVS has some pretty awesome stuff over there.
Yeah, we're doing a Prime Wireless 2.1 system. This is our new Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled wireless audio system with an SB1000 subwoofer. It's a phenomenal 2.1 system to really energize your music, give you a lot of streaming capabilities. It's multi-room capable with DTS Play-Fi. Larry would just love to spend another hour telling you all about the greatness of our wireless system in DTS Play-Fi. So you can check that out, potentially win it, and also an SB2000 Pro, which I know you guys know about our subwoofers. So check out information about those, and if there's any questions, we're available on all the social channels, email, whatever. We like to communicate however you guys want to communicate.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, see, I told you guys I didn't make it up. Some of these people are thinking like, yeah, maybe he's just making up these giveaways. No, you heard it from our man over here.
Yeah, Nick. We're excited. We love to give away some free stuff, especially now. A lot of people out of work. It's not the best time to be investing in home audio. So anything we can do to bring some great sound to households, we're glad to do it.
Absolutely. Very cool. Oh, anything else that you want to address? You got a lot of people in the chat over here, or did you answer most of those?
Oh, I don't know. I sort of ran.
There was one very important question for Larry, and that is which Ninja Turtle is your favorite?
Oh, I've discussed this numerous times. It's Donatello, and I go way back to my 80s with him, and it's even my kids even like it too. Yeah, I don't know why I cling to him, but I did, and my boys all like their own too. So,
well, I'm the Michelangelo to your Donatello, so
yeah. Nick, are you saying you're the one always carrying the pizza? Is that what you're saying?
You're the fun guy. He's the fun guy.
I'm always looking for it.
Yeah,
always hungry.
Very cool.
Well, again, thanks guys for letting us be a part of this. We had fun. Hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. Check out our happy hour in a couple of weeks. Drinks on us.
And there's a lot of you guys have a lot of your products on the HiFi Summit too, so make sure to check those out. Yeah, you'll see all the specs, and if you need more details, it'll link to your actual website. So
awesome. Cool.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being a part of this and taking the time out of your day. I know you guys are probably pretty busy planning all those crazy 30-inch subwoofers that you guys got in the back there.
The rumor mill started.
Yeah, it's a whole room. Yes,
get it rolling.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, guys.
Thank you
so
much.
Good luck with the rest of the show. All right. Thanks for the great questions too, everyone. Very awesome questions.
No problem. No problem. Later. And everybody here watching, we will be back at 11 a.m. or in about 13 minutes with Joe Finn from Parasound. So definitely stay tuned. And don't forget, there's a chat still going on in the lobby section of the site. See you soon.
Enjoy the weekend.